Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from New York Community Bank, Capital One Bank, Eastern Consolidated, M&T Bank, Sterling National Bank, Meridian Capital Group, Customers Bank, Aerial Property Advisors, Dime Community Bank, Perfect Building Maintenance. Additional funding has been provided by AKA Hotels Corman Communities, AmTrust Title Insurance Company, AVR Realty Company, Avison Young, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Bank Leumi USA, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Chase Mortgage Lending, JP Morgan Chase, Citizens Bank, Cohen Equities, Colliers International NYC, Collins Building Services, Connect One Bank, CPEX Real Estate Services, Douglaston Development, Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handler Real Estate Organization, Handro Properties, Hodges Ward Elliott, Inc., Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Center at Syracuse University, Kilroy Architectural Windows, Madison Realty Capital, Matone Group, Mercantile Bank, New Banks, Newmark Knight Frank, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Pulcinelli, Rockefeller Group, Rosewood Realty Services, SJP Properties, Stonehenge Partners, TD Bank, Terra CRG, the Knackle Group at Cushman & Wakefield, the Meringoff Family Foundation, the Moynihan Group, and these friends.
So everybody says that the world of condominiums is questionable. Is it a great time to buy? Is it a bad time to buy? What's the market? Is there too much coming on the board? I don't really know the answers. So as opposed to me pontificating the answer, I brought together these leaders to provide their insight and their thoughts on the condo market. What's truly happening? My guess is the 800-pound gorilla, even though he doesn't look it, David von Spreckelsen of Toll Brothers City Living. David Lowenfeld, who is the COO of Worldwide Holdings. Dan Cobleigh, who is the Managing Director for Development at Madison Realty Capital. And last but not least, without this lady, they couldn't even finance the projects, Susan Newman, who is the Vice President and Team Leader for M&T Bank. So as the banker amongst the group with the developers over here, was the comment of my demise being too early? How is the market? How do you see it as the?
So we think we're at a high point in the market.
Is that a good point? Or is it
there's more inventory than we're used to. There's more inventory at a big price point. But the contradiction in this is the projects that we have in our portfolio are doing remarkably well. So things are selling at a decent clip. We mostly finance things where our exposure is obviously a lot less than the developers, but where the developer anticipated selling project in the low $3,000 per foot. And that part of the market seems to be holding up very nicely.
So what is the average size of a unit that you would be financing? Is it 1,000 feet, 2,000 foot? Is it a $3 million purchase? Is it a $5 million purchase?
So I would say the inventory that we have been financing are the smaller sized apartments. So we're financing stuff that's in the $3 million to say $6 million range. So they're not your very large, 4-bedroom family apartments with a maid's room and a formal dining room that might be a $12 or $15 million apartment. We've always preferred to be on the smaller side with a lower price point.
Why I called you the 800-pound gorilla is because Toll Brothers City Living probably you have, by volume number of units, or by number of developments, you probably have more than any local developer has in New York City today. You have about 8 developments?
Yeah, we have 7 in the market right now, and then an 8th that we're going to open in September in Tribeca. None of the buildings are super large, so the largest number of units we have in any is 134, and a number of those units are sold now. But you know, in some of those developments, we just have a handful left, so we don't have a huge exposure at this point.
But looking at your website yesterday, in some of the buildings, your average price, as opposed to Susan's comment of the $3,000 a square foot, you're in the 2s or the $2,300. Am I correct?
Yeah, aside from 1110 Park Avenue, which is Park and 89th Street, where we're over $3,000 a foot, we are generally below $2,500 a foot, and you know, we find that that's a number that you can move product with. We get a little worried about being higher than that, and I'm surprised that when you're saying $3 million, you're talking about units that are only 1,000 square feet. If you're at a price point of $3,000 a foot, you usually think they're bigger apartments. They're very luxury apartments, and then they end up having a higher aggregate price. So you're lucky if you have stuff that's in the $3,000 foot range that's only $3 million.
But here's my question. How are the units doing, okay? You have totally different neighborhoods. You have Gramercy, you have Chelsea, you have Tribeca coming on board, you have Park Avenue, you have Brooklyn. You know, how are the units going? And then the question is, are people who are looking at a unit looking at all the neighborhoods, or are they going specifically for?
Yeah. So, I mean, supply has obviously caught up with demand. I mean, there were years coming out of the downturn where we sold very rapidly. We would sell, you know, 5 a month would be typical in a building. We'd be raising prices every few weeks. That period is over now. In most instances, there are some incentives to get buyers to move more quickly than they might. But you raise the concept of people shopping around and looking at different neighborhoods. We find that more than ever that people are looking for deals, and so we'll have a project in the West Village that's pretty unique, and you know, people will come in there and they'll also look at the building that we have on First Avenue and 52nd Street. Always great buildings with us, and I think that they're looking for the best deal, and there's inventory out there where they can shop around, and developers are willing to cut deals, so that's why they're looking.
Now, you've done the Milan, you've done the building on 74th Street, you've done many, and now you have one on 57th Street, which is a beautiful mixed-use building. There's rental apartments on the lower floors, condos on the higher floors. How do you see it? Because you've seen different cycles over the period of time on those different developments that I said. The Milan was a neighborhood, was always the same neighborhood and right nearby, okay?
Right.
74th Street was for larger family homes. What are you seeing on 57th Street, and what's your real thought about the market?
Let me start with the second half of that question. What do we see about the market? I think it's an unusual market in that the typical laws of supply and demand aren't working. We always think that price will drop to the level or rise to the level where supply and demand are in equilibrium. In fact, I think we'd all agree that there is more supply than there is demand, and yet we're not seeing prices drop. The market is in equilibrium in a different way, and that is the buyer's pace of buying and the seller's pace of selling are relatively in equilibrium. Buyers are slow to make decisions, and developers or sponsors are capitalized in such a way that they're not forced to sell. There's less bank leverage, there's less financing on these projects. Institutions that are providing that gap in between are sophisticated, and nobody's ready to sell for less than they expect to be able to get at a slower pace. When we came out of the recession, people were selling 10 to 15 units a month. And everybody said, well, that would be great. And then it got to be 5 units a month. And people are underwriting today at 3 units a month. And in fact, if you look around the city, many, many projects are selling at 1 unit a month or even less. One of the benefits of our mixed-use project here is that because we have value both in a rental piece a very large commercial piece, and the condominiums up top, we're able to sell at a pace where we believe the market will recognize the value, recognize the quality, and respond to the price. But it's going to take a little bit longer than everybody expected.
Do you believe what David was saying, that people who are coming to 57th Street and 2nd Avenue are also people who are shopping at, in Gramercy Park and in Tribeca?
Absolutely. We know that to be the case because we look at their shopping bags. We look at the takeaway from the project they were at before, and they're bringing in shopping bags from all different parts of the city. What I will add to that is that the sales process with people who are looking to spend $10 million and up on an apartment, we're finding that sales process to be much easier and much quicker than people who are buying in the $4 to $6 million range.
What do you attribute that to?
I think that with regard to people who are buying 4 to 6, I think David used the word people looking for a deal. I would characterize that as people who are trying to time the market. People who are investing 10, 12, $15 million in a home generally have larger net worths, larger portfolios, and they've been indoctrinated into the idea in general that you can't time the market, that you're buying the home to live in it because you like the product, you like the quality, you like the location, you believe you're getting a fair and reasonable price, and if it's worth $2 more in 90 days or $2 less in 90 days, it doesn't affect how you look at it. People who are stretching to get into a home at a specific location and are looking in the 4 to 6, as David described it, people looking for a deal, they're much more tentative in terms of being willing to go to contract.
And they're also likely financing, where the guys who are paying $10 million and up are paying in cash.
Right.
So they can move faster.
You have 2 major developments that you're involved with, which is what David at Lowenfeld is talking about. One would once say, they used to call them the Uber apartments, the more expensive apartments. How are they? You got Great Jones and you have
78 Irving Place in Gramercy Park, and I think location is phenomenal in both instances. NoHo has become something today that it wasn't. The demographics of Manhattan are constantly changing, and NoHo is a place now that's an elite sort of place to get into. But in terms of an investment and how we value the kinds of projects that we pursue, obviously location is everything. It's hard to create a brand new location, but rather than just looking at value, looking at creating a product that there really isn't a whole lot of equivalency. My background I bring into this industry was from architecture and from design. And I think if you really spend time, and I know Toll does a very good job of this as well, they have a lot more product they have to move, but if you're sort of in the boutique space and you have the opportunity to create 16 really exquisite, unique apartments that all have something that's distinguishing about each one.
Before you joined Madison, you were with Macklowe. So you were involved the initial time at 432 Park Avenue. A sliver tower, but it's a beautiful building, there's no question. There's a different market for different people. Do you think it's easier to do only the $10 million, which is what David said, these people who want to spend $10 million, which is, to me, a lot of money on an apartment, or is it maybe better for what David von Spreckelsen did at the Sutton, where people said, I'm looking at the tax advantages of getting a tax abatement, which I'll get into in a second.
I think it's an entirely different market. Up on the Billionaires Row, you're looking at a lot of foreign investment. Most of the buyers there, were of that ilk down at Great Jones and these like NoHo, Gramercy. All of our buyers are local, a lot of them hedge fund guys, but a lot of creative industry guys as well. They're Manhattanites, and they're not just looking for an investment. Actually, as I believe David said earlier, they're people who, they're not looking to time the market perfectly from an investment standpoint. They're probably not even, if you're near Gramercy Park, you're looking at probably as a legacy asset for your kids and your grandchildren. It's something that is going to hold its value. Is it going to appreciate to a 2x multiple? That's not how you're thinking. You're thinking, is it a great place to raise a family, to hang out, a second home? There's almost no equivalency.
More specifically, 78 Irving, that's a neighborhood, okay? 1110 Park Avenue is a neighborhood. 100 Barrow is a neighborhood. Pier House is a neighborhood, okay? Your development is in a mixed neighborhood, okay? It's a busy neighborhood. I'd say a number of the people are older. When you're lending, how do you make a decision on the neighborhood? And
I have to say we trust our borrowers, we trust their judgment, and if someone comes to us and says, look, this is a transitional area, I'm going to price it accordingly, or I'm going to do X, Y, and Z that will make this a unique product, we don't necessarily feel like we have to be in a certain location. And our projects are spread everywhere. I mean, we've got a development in every corner of the city.
If we go back to many years ago when David was first on my show, and we would talk about condo development in 2006, 2007, and you the two of you, ironically, were on the show together.
That was your most successful show, wasn't it?
Of course, it was. And it's his 13th show. His
and you anticipated the recession, did you?
Right, but the comment that I said at that time was people didn't want to look. They didn't need a model apartment. That was one, and another matter that they all wanted was they wanted a tax abatement. Since tax abatements went away, that wasn't the subject before. Before somebody was buying, they were looking at the lower cost alternative and they said, okay, what's my monthly cost going to be? If I have a mortgage of this and I have a tax payment, it was a different case. Then for a number of years, we lost it because there was no condo developments with tax abatements or tax payments. And then you have a deal that you were one of the first affordable condominiums at the Sutton.
Right. When we were looking at purchasing that site, it had, the foundation was already in. It was a project that was going to be a rental project, and the developer decided to sell it. And we saw that neighborhood as sort of transitioning and probably right for condo, but most of the new construction had been rental. So we thought people were going to be pretty price conscious there, and we decided to do on-site affordable units so we could have the tax abatement, because without doing on-site affordable, we wouldn't have had the tax abatement. So it's very substantial. It's a 20-year abatement, and people have responded very well to it. And I would say that what's interesting now is that people, because like you're saying, it used to be available to almost anyone, and now it's not. When people came into the sales office, they said they wanted us to put in writing that if we weren't able to get the abatement, they could walk. And that's because that was such an important part of their decision in buying there. And we were willing to do, we knew we were going to get the abatement, so we were willing to do that. And people have closed, nobody's walking, we have the abatement.
Now here's an interesting point. When you built this building on 57th Street, which is mixed use, as we said, with the Whole Foods over there, the school and the resident rental and the condos, you were also building a building in Long Island City. Long Island City has limited number of condominiums. Why didn't you think of a condo in Long Island City? While in reality, a number of the condos in Long Island City, since there's such a small supply, are relatively doing well.
Right. So I'm going to treat that as one of three questions that you're asking me, because I didn't get a chance to jump in with some of these other
Fine, so I answer.
So let's start with that one. We believe that Long Island City and Brooklyn also will be
Since he lives in Brooklyn, we realize that.
Brooklyn already, but these neighborhoods are and will become more desirable as condo locations. And that's because people are finding they're fabulous places to live. They're living in rentals. There's desire for home ownership, and totally, it is a place where we would look at doing condos in the future. At the time that we started the project, we didn't think that the condo market was deep enough to do that. On tax abatements, we also, because we're doing this deal with the Education Construction Fund of the City of New York at 57th Street, those units benefit from a very deep tax abatement. And buyers are finding it moving, but the market has changed. It's not an assumption in the market in Manhattan anymore. People aren't looking for the real estate tax abatement, and if you have it, it's a benefit. But I thought the really interesting comment was when you talked about new neighborhoods. And I think there are 3 new neighborhoods that are developing in Manhattan. The most advanced is 57th Street, and that if you think about a decade back, when 157 was being developed and 432 was being developed, it wasn't really thought of as a residential place. It's even got a nickname now. And that is the place in Manhattan where the most large-scale projects, condo projects, are being developed. The other two places that are going to change the face of our city forever is the Hudson Yards and also what we used to call Trump World, Trump Place, where Waterline is now building out and finishing out.
Right, the great Waterline property on 60th, 61st Street.
Exactly right. And those emerging neighborhoods, and what's interesting about them is that those are all $3,000 plus product. So that the same model that really worked so well at Time Warner is being applied at Hudson Yards. Sort of the extension of the Upper West Side towards the water, I think, is going to be successful in the Waterline projects. And the 57th Street corridor has been established as one of the most desirable neighborhoods in a place that we wouldn't have imagined people were going to live. So I think that the condo market, actually, if you step back and look at it, demonstrates the dynamism of New York City and the emergence of people being willing to live anywhere, not just in infill locations.
What do you see? What's your thought about David's comment?
Well, you know, I think emerging markets are always to be pursued because you just can't get in this market into the established neighborhoods, but you got to be a little bit cautious. The lenders and the capital markets are always going to be a little bit more squeamish about very outlying neighborhoods. So how am I going to get underwritten if I want to go into, you know, the Lower East Side? Well, that was 5 years ago. Now they'll underwrite the Lower East Side happily. So, you know, projecting forward, the ability to project forward into what a market will do, you have to be able to have the wherewithal. You have to be able to, you know, you're not going to get your loans levered quite up so high in those markets. You're going to probably need a lot more sponsorship behind those projects, and they'll happen. But for us, looking at more established, how to find, you know, a creative deal, going through a ULURP, going through a BSA, the kind of land actions that most, you know, people don't have the stomach for, the time that it takes, that's how you can accrete value and somehow get into some of these defined neighborhoods. And
Worldwide was in Lower Manhattan before most people were. Part of it was due to the 421Gs, which were the tax abatement for the conversions over there. Where can somebody get an affordable apartment? Because, you know, we want to be realistic. You know,
Bushwick.
Okay, you know, is it Bushwick? You know, you've looked. You guys were involved originally with Williamsburg. Right after the rezoning, you were involved with the Williamsburg neighborhood. You were also involved with Long Island City before the massive construction was there in Long Island City. So you were visionary in that name. So how do you find that next opportunity? Okay, going through your chart on your website, you've been a variety of neighborhoods over there, and it's changed. Okay, I'll give you a good example. There was a condo development built on like 109th and Park Avenue, and 109th and Park Avenue. When I saw the deal, I was a little put off. Part of it was the fact that it was right next to the railroad tracks of the Penn Central. And the second part was it was adjacent to 3 New York City housing projects. So as a person, you know, from the outside looking in, I say, this is going to be a tough deal to sell to certain people. Now, the developer said, you know what? I'm going to provide to somebody a 2-bedroom apartment for maybe $1 million or $1.25 million. So that was the price. Unfortunately, this person couldn't find the traditional bank to do it.
So here's the problem fundamentally with banking, and even though I've been in this industry now for 6 or 7 years, most of my time in the industry has been on the development side. And I've worked for some brilliant developers. What I've come to learn is that when a developer sees a void in the market, product that's not being offered, and they have this great idea, this doesn't exist, I'm going to provide this. It is more challenging to find conventional financing, because what does a bank instinctively want to do? They want to go look for comps. And you're saying to your banker, but this is the void. This is what's not in the market. That's why I'm going to be successful. And your banker's saying, but in order for me to get through this through a committee structure, we need to know how else other things are selling. And there's an irony in this, Because the irony is when you have other supply, you're going to have a competitive market once you actually fill it. If you have successfully identified a void and you're building a product that nobody else has that you believe will be marketable, you'll be enormously successful. And you don't want the competition in that context. So I would say, unfortunately, conventional banks, commercial banks, are not your most likely source of funding when in fact you've been creative and you've found that void.
So when we did 71 Broadway downtown, it was a conversion of the old U.S. Steel building to residential. It was under the 421G program, as you mentioned, and we had a wonderful lunch meeting with a bank that is located down there, still located down there. And we're meeting at the right level with the right people, and they're taking notes and their folios are open and everything is good. And I said, and we see this as a pioneering project to establish a new neighborhood. The folio's closed. They thanked us very much. They said, we don't bank pioneering projects. So there's
it's
real
the void,
life.
right. It's the void.
When you went to Long Island City and Williamsburg, how were those decisions made, even though you were a publicly held company?
Yeah, so, I mean, we did the project all cash, the acquisition and the construction, so that wasn't a consideration. But I had been working at Silver Cup, and I had been watching, you know, I was just going to get into a bigger platform at Toll, and so I was looking for neighborhoods to develop in, and because we weren't established, we hadn't been putting properties together, I was looking at places that were being rezoned. And that was right at the cusp of the Hunters Point rezoning. So we did the first project there after the rezoning, and you were mentioning Williamsburg. We did the first project there after the rezoning, which was North 8, and then went on to do a much bigger project, Northside Piers. So that was how we got into things when we were just breaking into the market. We were looking for emerging markets.
So in summation, if I'm a buyer, am I in a good place? Or are there opportunities out there? I mean, I heard that the buyer who wants to purchase over a $10 million, they know what they want, okay? There's a certain type of project. They want to know it. They're New Yorkers. Some of them may be on 57th Street, may be international buyers. But somebody who's going to live and work in the neighborhood, that's a certain category. Below 10.
Yeah, I think that it's you know, historically prices are high. So it's not the greatest time to be a buyer, but there is a lot of supply. And so there's the ability to look at a lot of different buildings, to price buildings, and to get, you know, almost exactly what you want, which you couldn't in a market that's rising rapidly because you don't have the time to make the decision.
And one last comment before I end the show, and thank you, is I recently have been watching, and I had never watched $1 Million Listing. And my comment was, no way that these deals take 2 minutes, that the developer hires a broker to sell the building in 2 minutes, and there is no way that these units are sold in 5 minutes either. I'd like to thank David, Dan, and Susan, and I'll see you next week.